So some of you might have seen earlier today that another Conservative MP here in the UK has lost the whip. The UK has a sort of party-based system of democracy, similar to in other countries in Europe. And obviously America also has political parties, but in the UK they function much more as like cohesive organizations. From my sort of understanding of viewing things across the Atlantic, political parties in the US function more as a kind of framework through which one can run for office, in much the same way as Bernie Sanders had previously been an independent senator and then like became a Democrat so that he could run for president. The US, you become a registered Democrat or Republican rather than having to sign up as a member of the Democratic or Republican Party and like pay them membership dues. In the UK, kind of political parties are like organizations which you can join and pay to be a member of, which you can get kicked out of. And that tends to mean that the politicians within them have to be much more cohesive. Both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in the UK will profess to some level of being like a broad church and having a range of different politicians with different political viewpoints in them, right? In reality, I would say that the system in the UK allows for less of that than does the system in the US. In fact, I don't know whether a senator, like a senator or member of the House, whatever, can be impeached in the US and be kicked out of the Congress entirely. I don't know if they can be like ejected from their party. There are now so many Conservative members of Parliament who have been suspended. So when I talk about having the whip being withdrawn, that essentially means that a political party, the Conservative Party specifically here, goes, you have committed some kind of misdemeanor, and so you might have been elected to Parliament as a Conservative or as a member of the Labour Party, etc. But you've committed XYZ misdemeanor, and therefore we are going to say that, for the time being at least, you are not a member of our parliamentary party. It's a little bit complicated in the sense that oftentimes someone can still be a ordinary member of a political party without being a member of the parliamentary party. So they might be in Parliament as technically as an independent MP. In fact, this is true of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm fairly sure is still a member of the Labour Party as like a private person, and yet in Parliament has been like kicked out of the party and so sits as an independent. We now have so many Conservative members of Parliament in particular who have been kicked out of the Conservative Party for all kinds of misdeeds. This latest one is the most baffling. This reads like it's from a different era. There is more to this story than the headline would imply. Tory MP Mark Menzies quits as ministerial aide over gay sex claims. Essentially, this story broke that this Member of Parliament had paid for sex and had asked this escort to buy him some drugs. He didn't resign as a Member of Parliament, but resigned as a sort of part of the government. If you are a Member of Parliament, you can be like just an ordinary Member of Parliament, which is sometimes called a backbencher, or if your party is in government, you might also have a job in the government, which means that as well as representing people in your constituency by voting on things, you also have a role in like the administration of the state, I guess. One of, I think, the kind of lowest rungs on that ladder, so the very highest rung would be to be a government minister or a member of the cabinet, one of the lower rungs on that is to be a parliamentary private secretary, where you kind of assist another member of the government. So he was working for Alan Duncan and resigned that job. So remained an MP, but resigned that kind of privileged government position. But remained as a member of parliament and has, I mean, how many elections have we had since 2014? We've had 2015, 2017, 2019. So has been elected another 3 times since then. But this latest story is that he met someone for drinks. It's not been implied who, or I don't know if it's one person, many people, and found himself in a premises somewhere where over the phone he rang some of his staff in his office. I don't know whether it was a constituency office or his parliamentary office, and he said that bad people had locked him up and that he needed money like now, and in order for that money to get given to the bad people, one of his staff had to cash in her ISA. An ISA, for anyone watching from outside the UK, is like a tax-privileged savings account, right? So it's like a savings account with, I think it's £20,000 limit. I think you can pay in £20,000 a year, and you don't pay any tax on the interest or like returns if it's a stocks and shares one on it. One of his assistants, who was 70 years old, which I doesn't necessarily feel relevant, but just feels like it adds a bit of flavour to the story, went and cashed in some of her ISA to get out this money. Okay, it was initially £5,000, and then it went up. Sorry, thank you, Trumpton rules. And then it later increased to £6,500. The way this has been spoken about everywhere has been like, what a horrible scandal and stuff. And like, yes, that, and we will come to that. But like, this does sound like scary. A member of the Conservative government, I'm not like willing to give a huge amount of extension of, their day-to-day dealings. I don't feel super highly of, but it's just interesting the complete lack of sympathy which this has been spoken about with. But so this constituency officer cashed in this money to pay these quote-unquote bad people in order to let him go, seems to be the implication. From what seems to have been suggested about the story, neither Menzies himself nor any members of his team seem to, from what we know at the moment, have called the police about this later. They seem to have just like let it go. And the reason that it's causing significant controversy now is not only everything about the story, but the fact that the staff member was then reimbursed using money which had been raised for electoral purposes. So money that should have been used for buying leaflets and posters and Facebook ads to try and get re-elected at the next election. That money was instead used to reimburse the member of staff who had paid this money in the first place. Anyway, but Mark Menzies is not the first person that has been kicked out of the Conservative Party because of perceived or real misdeeds. In fact, last week, was it? William Bragg, who I once saw described on Twitter as Billy Bragg's Wario, and just cannot get over that, I think has chosen to resign the whip, like, preemptively. British politics often works like that, where you kind of, you agree to resign rather than get kicked. You sort of fall on your own sword. William Bragg is this chap here, had sent some nude or lewd photos of some description on, I think, Grindr, and whoever he had sent these photos to had blackmailed him in order to get the telephone numbers of other members of parliament. And he had done that. He'd given the mobile phone numbers of other MPs to this person, who we don't entirely know who it is just yet. My understanding is that it doesn't appear to be like a foreign intelligence agency or something. It appears to be someone who, I don't know, wants to just kind of cause some trouble in Westminster. Whether that's a journalist or I don't know. We sort of heard of some other members of Parliament kind of reporting that they'd received text messages from the person that William Ragg had given their phone numbers to. There are currently 18 members of Parliament who were previously members of political parties that have since been suspended or have jumped before they were pushed and are now sitting as independent MPs because they have either been kicked out or have voluntarily resigned before they were kicked out of their parties themselves. And there are kind of some that are slightly different to this. We've got Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn. We have a few members of the Labour Party who have been kind of nudged out in slightly more complex circumstances. Who else? Nick Brown, Labour's long-serving former chief whip, suspended from the party after a formal complaint. But no more information has been revealed. We talked about Jeremy Corbyn a moment ago. Geraint Davies was suspended in June 2023 after Politico revealed allegations of sexual harassment against him. Jeffrey Donaldson resigned as DUP leader and was suspended over allegations of historical sex offences. I mean, the number of these that are sex offence related is kind of horrifying. Jonathan Edwards of Plaid Cymru was arrested for assaulting his wife and later cautioned and lost the whip for that. Matt Hancock? I didn't realise Matt Hancock had been suspended. So Matt Hancock went to do the celebrity reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here whilst he should have been in Parliament and was suspended for that. There's so many of these. Conor McGinn had a formal complaint, the nature of which is not known. Kate Osamore, the MP for Edmonton, was suspended from Labour in January for saying that Gaza should be remembered as a genocide on Holocaust Memorial Day. Some of the Labour Party ones are more factional in nature, of Keir Starmer kind of jumping on some of these to push out members of the Labour Party who are on the left, who he doesn't like too much. Mark Menzies, we've just been talking about, has been suspended. Particularly, again, it's worth saying the suspension is due to the fact that not the kind of palaver itself in which he was held hostage or whatever for some money, but the fact that he then used campaign money to reimburse whoever. It's worth saying for anyone that's watching that's not in the UK, like, this is not normal. It is not normal to have this many members of Parliament who have been kicked out of their party, particularly not to have quite so many that have been kicked out for sex offences at worst, sexual misconduct. I was going to say at best, that's not the right words there. It's an interesting place we're in as a country. We're also in this place where, because the politics aren't shifting quite so much anymore, scandal, I think, is going to be the big way that political parties try to criticise each other, which is not entirely unfair. It's probably worth saying, like, it's not entirely fair to use the fact that members of the opposing party are up to, at best, little misdemeanours, at worst, horrible crimes. It's not untoward or unreasonable or anti-political to use those as ways to go, actually, are these people fit to govern? Probably not, if this is the people they hang around with. But we are increasingly seeing like politicians making like fumbles and misdemeanors and having like things they did in the past becoming the way in which political parties are separating themselves from one another. It's one of those things where this feels like this is the direction in which British politics is going at the moment, is that the real big substantive differences on politics and policy between the two parties are kind of fading a little bit, and the big contests, the big kind of sparring between the two parties is more on these kind of misdemeanors rather than on the slightly more substantive stuff.